What's going on out there, y'all? And thanks again so much for joining us here on Expanded Perspectives with me, Cam Hale. And, of course, sitting next to me is my partner in crime, Philly Filson.
How's it going, everybody? Yes, I'm here in Skeleton Studios after celebrating a beautiful 4th of July here in Texas. We had a great time. We went to my cousin's house.
We got spoiled this time.
He lives on a lake here and just outside of Fort Worth, and it was great. The weather was perfect. Normally, we start our 4th of July celebration around 3 o'clock. The fireworks don't start till like 10, and it's usually really, really hot. Now, I don't get in the pool. I have nothing against the pool, but when there's 30 or 40 kids in the pool, forget it. They're going to be cannonballing you, dunking you. It's just, they're climbing on your back. They're scratching you. It's just not any fun, right? So, but this year we got lucky. A cold front hit that morning. It was beautiful. It was one of the nicest 4th of Julys I've been to I can ever remember. I think it was only like 80 degrees.
It was really nice this year.
So we had a great time. Luke had fun because he got to shoot all the fireworks this year. His big brothers, they had something else to do. They're getting to that age where they're too cool to hang out with mom and dad, and they went and did stuff with their own friends.
Facts.
So it was just me and little Fizzy and my wife. Well, they're lost, right? Little Fizzy got to shoot all the fireworks. We went down there. There's a stand not too far from our house, and he loaded up. Now, if you don't know, little Fizzy loves Roman candles, boy.
Pyromaniac.
That's his favorite. He likes to go, and man, he went ham on those things. He was having a blast, of course, like they do. The kids got in a battle, right? They're shooting them at each other.
Yes.
My wife and all the other mothers are freaking out. All the other dads are cheering them on, like, oh, don't worry about it. So what? So if somebody loses an eye, it's just part of growing up.
They can fix that now, right?
Yeah, so they had a good time. Don't you ever notice that that's funny, though? Like, the way parenting's done is one parent is usually for something, the other one's against it. I always feel like I'm butting heads with my wife because my wife's like, oh, don't do that. It might hurt him. You're like, dude, Mom, leave him alone.
Yeah, but
like,
you know what? They don't have concussions. And do you even
That's
remember
true.
how many you have?
Oh, no.
Exactly.
No. I get in trouble. I got in trouble this morning, I'll tell you. I was preparing chicken for the grill, and my wife saw me touch the raw chicken. Then she saw me with the spice shaker, and she's like, you just touched that shaker with raw chicken. I was like, yeah. And she goes, did you always do that? I go, I've been doing that for over 20 years. And she just rolls her eyes. I'm like, it's not hurt you.
You died of salmonella.
So I had to sit there and get the 409 out and show her that I cleaned out the shaker.
Now she's never going to believe anything that you touch, right? Now it's never going to.
Do you know me?
Man.
Do you
Sadly,
think I
yes.
use precaution at almost any time? No. That stuff's... Listen, if a little salmonella off some chicken breast kills me, it's my time to go.
It's going to be
That's the way I live,
thing,
right? What'd you do for your 4th?
Well, I really didn't go do anything. We hung out pretty much with the family until it was time for them to go do their stuff when they go watch the fireworks. And then the wife and I went and grabbed a quick dinner meal in the evening because there was nobody in town.
Right.
Everybody was out there. So we went and did that and come back, and then we just sat out here because of all the hoodlums that was running around shooting fireworks off in the neighborhood. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was popping by my house. I'm telling you.
But it was a good time. It was mainly the weather. That was mainly the thing that made it perfect. All of it was great. Yeah, had a really, really good time. Hope everybody out there had a good time. Nobody blew a finger off. Nothing too crazy happened. I know everybody always talks about the fireworks when they were kids. Ours was pretty powerful, too. Remember doing silly stuff with it all the time. But yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm glad that they've downsized the amount of power some of those fireworks had when we were kids.
Oh, yeah.
Literally, we were shooting like quarter sticks of dynamite.
That's what we'd blow the heck out of stuff. Yeah, you were blowing up all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, well.
Or the other ones called cherry bombs.
Yeah.
That was I remember those too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of cool, we have, incredibly cool listeners that send us stories each and every week. We got a pretty cool one sent to us a couple weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to play it yet, from a woman named Rebecca, and she has a pretty strange yet very interesting experience when she was young. Let's give that a listen. Check this out.
Hi, guys. I love your show. Not just because you're both great storytellers, but because you're open-minded but not gullible, and you have such wonderful attitudes about life, and the chemistry as friends is refreshing. So I'm a skeptic about most things in my life. I should have been born in Missouri. Show me. But I prefer to lean towards science, even though I've had numerous experiences that science cannot explain, at least yet. This is probably the most memorable of all of those out of the realm of science incidents I have had. This is an account of an incident that happened in 1974 when I was 15 years old in the city of Puebla, Mexico, where I lived with my family. And on this particular day, my younger sister Janet, she was 14, and her best friend Shay, who was also an American living in Puebla, and I were gathering in the afternoon so we could take a bus together to the city of Cholula that was on the outskirts of Puebla to make clay for art class. Now, while Janet and I were walking around the block to pick up Shay at her house, we saw an attractive American man appearing to be in his mid to late 30s, walking in the opposite direction on the other side of the street. He was carrying a large duffel bag over his shoulder, and Janet and I started speaking loudly in English, hoping we would get his attention, but to no avail. When we arrived at Shay's house, we insisted that she hurry for the possibility of us all catching up with that guy. By the time she was finally ready, we were sure we would have missed him. But instead, he was in the same place where we saw him last. We already told Shay about the guy, and with seeing him now and walking in the same direction he was, we all spoke up loudly in English, hoping again to get his attention. And this time it seemed to work. So from across the street, he yelled to us, "Do you speak English?" And he crossed the street after we all said yes, he crossed the street and to our side of the street and told us he was looking for a specific address, taking out a piece of paper where the address was written and showing it to us. And we didn't recognize the street name. It was a long, Aztec name beginning with the letter T. Now, we were on Tehuacan Street, and he thought the street we were on was the same street, but it wasn't. The spelling was totally different. But we decided to walk him to the house number on Tehuacan Street, just in case, the house number that he had on his paper. Now, walking to that address, each of us would be thinking different things, especially lots of questions. And he would look at each of us and answer our thoughts out loud. He was reading our minds. For instance, I thought to myself, I wonder what his name is. And he looked at me and he replied, Richard. And then apparently Janet, my younger sister, said she was wondering where he was from. And he turned to Janet and just said, Santa Barbara, California. Of course, I didn't know why he looked at Janet and said that. But I was catching on quickly to understand that he reads our minds, as none of us said a word, and he just answered our thoughts, our thought questions, and then he would face the person who apparently thought it. At one point, he looked directly at Shay and said that she shouldn't worry about Jaime, who was Shay's boyfriend, and that Jaime wouldn't be jealous. Later, Shay said she was worrying about what Jaime might think about the situation of joining in with this attractive guy. So we arrived to the house on Tehuacan Street that had the number he had on his paper. And it was in the same direction we were going to go catch the Cholula bus. But he didn't know any Spanish, and we spoke with the maid who had answered that door, and the maid said that this was not the house he was looking for and that the people who lived there were not the people Richard was looking for, and she closed the door. So Richard continued addressing our thoughts, and after the door closed, I said out loud, hey, we probably have a map at our house. Actually, it was an apartment. And we could find the address from there. So as you might have gathered by now, we, Shay, Janet, and I, abandoned the journey to Cholula to make the clay. Everyone agreed that this was a good idea. So we turned back and we walked to our apartment, which was kind of around the block, one block down and around the block. And then once there, Richard, Shay, and Janet were joined at the dining room table with my older sister, Louise. She's the oldest of us three. And our maid, Anna, who lived with us. And they all met Richard, and as my mother did too. And later, Anna and my mother, on different occasions, pulled me aside and chastised me for bringing a stranger in our house. Of course, I was a rebellious, sassy little 15-year-old girl. And so when my mother confronted me, I replied that she wasn't living her Christian values if she thought it was all right to put a person off who needed help. So that's how I tried to get through with that. Anyhow, it turned out we didn't have a map at our home. So I ran around the apartment building asking neighbors if they had a map, and no one did. So I went to the ground floor beauty shop and asked the ladies in there. No one had one, nor had they heard of the street. But one beautician suggested that we take a bus, and before getting on the bus, asking the bus driver if they knew of the street, because she said the bus drivers there know the city and the city streets best. So we thought that was a good idea. Now, all the time that I was running around, Richard, both my sisters, Louise and Janet, Shay, and my mother were visiting with him around it was a round dining room a round table in the dining room. And again, he was answering everybody's thoughts without them talking much. But periodically, I'd stop by and give him an update. So-and-so neighbor didn't have a map. I'm going to go next to this other person. During one of these updates, I noticed that Richard had poured out a bunch of salt from the salt shaker, and it was in front of him, and he had formed it into a pyramid. And that was complete with 4 flat sides and a pointed top. I remember looking at that and thinking it was odd, but was more focused on trying to find the map for Richard. Later, Anna, our maid, commented to me that he was rude to make such a mess on the table with the salt. Now, I tried making a pyramid with salt with flat sides. It doesn't work. Anyhow, since no one in the building had a map, we took the advice of going to a bus stop and asking bus drivers about the address. We went to the bus stop that was around the corner on the street where Shay lived and where we first found Richard. Now, that bus stop was across the street from a park that normally was crowded with people, but this time it was totally empty when we got there. Richard, Shay, Janet, and I waited at that corner for the buses. Now, buses in Mexico, in any Mexican city, are very plentiful, and they would come about every 5 minutes or so. So when the buses arrived and stopped, I'd take the written address and ask the bus driver if they knew the street. And 5 buses went by in all. A couple of the bus drivers replied that if the spelling and the name was totally changed, they may know the street, but the other one said that there was no such street. I had been thinking earlier that I would continue with Richard to his designation, to his friend's place. And as I have said before, he was attractive and I was a 15-year-old boy crazy girl. But in a little bit, you will see why this is significant. After the 5th bus left, we were standing there quietly. Shay, Janet, and I were facing Richard, and his back was towards the park. So we were facing Richard, and behind him was the park with nobody in it, while Richard was facing the opposite way with his back to the park. His duffel bag was on the ground next to him. We were all silent, and then suddenly, like poof, in a split second, a large, old-time, taxi-looking, what we call bomb of a car appeared right before our eyes. There was no engine sound. It was facing the wrong direction on a one-way street, and it was just behind Richard. We, that's Shay, Janet, and I, were totally flabbergasted. I mean, totally breathless in shock. The car appeared old, with splotchy green paint job, light green, with faded areas here and there. Directly after that big car appeared, There's a man who was in the driver's seat, and he looked and sounded exactly like Alfred Hitchcock. He was seated in the driver's seat. He had one elbow out the open window, resting his arm there. And he said in a total Alfred Hitchcock voice, "Young man, are you looking for..." And then he said the name of the street. He said that the exact name of the street that no one had heard of before. His voice was totally Alfred Hitchcock's voice, too. And immediately, Richard picked up his duffel bag like it was nothing. He turned around and he said, "Yes, I am." And at that, Alfred Hitchcock closed his hands together as if he was in prayer. And then he opened them with a map between his hands. He said to Richard, pointing, "This is where we are, and this is where we're going." And he was pointing out the places on the map. Richard was leaning towards Alfred Hitchcock and getting this information, and they continued talking to each other. Now, Shay leaned against the car to catch her breath because we were all blown away by the immediate appearance of that car, and then Alfred Hitchcock's appearance. And Janet told Shay sharply to stop leaning on the car because if it disappears like it appeared, she would be flat on her back in the street. And Shay was like, "Oh, yeah," and she stopped leaning. Now, at about that point, Richard picked up his duffel bag, and he walked around the front of the car. He threw his duffel bag in the car, and right before he got into the passenger seat, he looked at me and asked, "Don't you want to come?" I said an emphatic no, but earlier I was going to. I had thought about that. He said, "Okay," and he got in the seat, and then the car, with no engine motor sounds, turned the corner towards Shay's house. And while it was turning, we heard Alfred Hitchcock say loudly, I mean very loudly, to us, "Have a nice trip. See you in the funny papers." Now, I had never heard that saying before, "see you in the funny papers," but I understand it was something that was used a lot, I think, in the 30s and 40s. I don't know. And that's the 1930s and 1940s. Okay, as soon as the car straightened onto the street, the car with Alfred Hitchcock and Richard in it disappeared immediately, as quickly as it had first shown up. That's Shay, Janet, and I, were so freaked out that we all started running toward our home in a frantic state. But at one point, we all stopped and kind of gathered in together, kind of hugging each other and feeling like a deer in headlights. When we were together like that, we heard all around us, loud, and especially above us, that Alfred Hitchcock voice laughing and laughing. And after a minute or two of that low, sinister laugh, it stopped, and we felt released, and we ran on. So for the past almost 50 years, I have kept my eyes open to anything that might explain the incident that Janet and I have told the story through the years. We have not been in touch with Shay in many years, so I don't know if she has spoken of it after we all left Mexico. I've asked many people what they thought, and only once, when I went to a seance that a friend had organized, did the medium tell me it was an alien abduction when I explained the experience to her, and she was doing a reading of a group. And that never felt right to me, but I don't know. Now, in 2008, in that year, I'm an adjunct professor at a university in psychology and in counseling. And that year, I was teaching a course, The Psychology of Dreams, and also Introduction to Psychology. And so I was doing a lot of reading and things like that about dreams and sleep and so forth. And I ran across a Rutgers article on the torture of sleep deprivation that shamed our nation and Gitmo with the terrorist prisoners. And I'm going to send this to you in writing, and so it'll have the link to that article. But anyhow, so I read much about sleep and dreams and the effects of sleep deprivation, what that has on the psyche. And the article was about sleep deprivation to bin Laden's driver, Salim Hamdan. And the article described how Hamdan was tortured by being deprived of sleep for 50 days. I read on and was blown away when I read 2 paragraphs in that article that stood out for me. The first read, quote, "They also said the records indicated Hamdan and other prisoners at the remote detention camp in southeastern Cuba were visited by someone called Alfred Hitchcock, apparently after the British master of psychological thriller films who died in 1980. Later in the article, under the heading, Who was Alfred Hitchcock?, it read, defense lawyers said they were curious about the meaning of entries in the documents that Alfred Hitchcock had visited Hamdan and other prisoners. Quote, "Who Alfred Hitchcock is, I have no idea," said Navy Lieutenant Commander Brian Miser, and defense lawyer. Quote, "It's obviously a code name for something." Now, I have not found any further strange information about an Alfred Hitchcock, but the incident that happened to us in 1974, and at that time Alfred Hitchcock was alive. Now, I never thought that it was the real Alfred Hitchcock or a ghost of one, but a duplicate in some strange way. This entire incident was experienced by my sister, her friend Shay, and me, while several other witnesses were a part of the experience at certain points. My older sister Louise, my mother, and our maid Anna met Richard and witnessed some of his strange behaviors, like reading minds and making pyramids out of salt. I would just like to know if anyone out there has any idea what it may have been about. Maybe you or one of the listeners has a suggestion. Now, I've listened to many of your past episodes, and I recall a young man who sent you a recording about an incident that happened to him and his parents in the city of Atlixco in the Mexican state of Puebla, which is where the city of Puebla is in. Atlixco, by the way, is a beautiful city. Anyhow, I had most of my out-of-science experiences there in Puebla, and I've always wondered if it is a place where magical types of things happen. Even when I go back to visit my sister, my nephew, and his family, I have strange things happen, like premonitions, real heavy on premonitions, kind of ghostly kind of stuff, things like that. So I don't think it's a thing of youth for me being, 15, but rather of place. And so that is interesting to me. Anyhow, thank you for doing your podcast. It's brought me a lot of fun and comfort. If you think want to know if I'm not a wacko, I may be, because I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I teach as adjunct at a university. I have 3 master's degrees. My sister Janet, who could tell you the story too if you wanted to hear, she's a veterinarian and also a paramedic here in Texas with me. And my sister Louise, she has a PhD and teaches at a university in Mexico. So I think we could be considered credible. Anyhow, that's it. And thank you for listening. And I sure would like to hear what some other people might think about this. Thanks. Bye.
Wow, what an incredible story. So,
wow.
She knows she didn't see Alfred Hitchcock, but what she saw was an imposter, something trying to make itself look that way. And you've heard of similar stories before on this show where people know something's not quite right. Now, some people think it's alien abduction and they're implanting a false memory into your brain. So really, she was abducted along with her sister and friend, and they put some kind of false memory into your mind where the gray was actually looked like something else. Like sometimes you hear it looked like an owl, but the person's like, but it didn't really look, it looked kind of like an owl. And then now when I think back to it, I know it wasn't an owl. Was this something like that where it's making, it knows that she knows what Alfred Hitchcock is, so it's going to make her false memory think that that's what it was? Or was it something else?
Man.
And it gets even stranger because there are other stories of people running into celebrities or people that they know that it wasn't really them, but something was trying to disguise itself. And that's where you get in this gray area. What is that? Is that a demon pretending to be something else? Is that an alien? Is it fae? What is it? And why do they experience it? And one thing I'll mention before we take our break is it wasn't a single person experience. She experienced it. Her sister experienced it. Her friend experienced it. Heck, they had the guy over to her apartment or flat. Her mother met the guy. So you have all these people that met and experienced this experience. How could they all these years later, still believe exactly what happened in that story? How was the dude able to read their thoughts? Like they would just think like, I wonder where you're from. And he would answer. What is that? Because that too starts falling in line with alien abduction.
It's so disturbing on every level.
It's a fascinating story.
It always makes me think, is that going on in real time? Or is this are all of these people that saw him or met him, were they abducted? Were they someplace else when all this was going on?
Right.
Sharing like the single experience?
And it was put into their memory somehow.
Yeah, and then the whole thing, because if you can just time travel like that, jump in there and flash out, it's no big deal to grab you, go experiment on you for 6-8 hours and bring you back 5 minutes later.
Yeah. And
or bring you back at the exact moment that they grabbed you, and you not even know it.
Right.
Nothing be missing.
And there's all these stories of the multiverse, and like sometimes people can bleed over into a parallel universe that's almost exactly like ours. And some people bleed over just for a couple hours. Some people bleed over for a few minutes. Some people believe they bleed over for a couple weeks, and then they come back, and it's like a splintering. You think of like a family tree, how it splinters, and changes. The butterfly effect. There's been shows and movies and all kinds of things talked about like that. What are you going to be talking about on today's show?
Well, I'm going to get into, spurred on by an encounter with an old friend, I'm going to get into some creepy stories that involve barns. Everybody's seen or heard or even been into a creepy old barn. So when we get back from the break, we're going to dig into some unsettling barn stories, folks. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. All right, y'all, I've got something I'm going to share here with you that happened to me within this past week. And usually that's how a lot of these things y'all know goes. What sends me down a path wanting to find or tell a story is something that jogs a memory about a thing. But this is funny. I ran into a friend, and I can't really just say ran into because, it's one of those things like, look, I see this guy every couple of weeks all the time, right? Like we run in the same circles. So I know this guy pretty well. He knows we do the podcast. I don't think he listens. He doesn't strike me as the type that listens. He's never really, if it has, it might be very few. He's just not one of those kinds of guys, but he knows of it, and he knows enough of it to know what we talk about and what topics are discussed. And so the other day, when I bumped into him, we were sitting around there in town, and he said, man, I got scared the other night. I instantly thought of y'all, and he said, so I want to tell you this quick story. He said he works on a big cutting horse ranch, and he said, so what ended up happening, they was out at the barn late one night or whatnot, and he thought he saw something this week pass between the barns. And he said, man, because it didn't look like a barn cat or what you would normally see around there. He said this thing was oddly shaped, like it didn't move right. Like he said, I thought it was like a little person. So of course, instantly, right, y'all know he's got my interest, so I'm piqued at this moment, like, okay, go on. And he said he saw it kind of just vanish, and it looked like a small person, like down, crouched over, running. And so he goes down to where they're at, and he said at this point he's freaked out, right? Now he sees the silhouette of this small thing reaching up on the side, like by the edge of one of the, I don't know if it was a tack room or what it was that he had run around by, but it looks like it's reaching up to something. So he's panicking, he said all he can think about, is, oh, what am I fixing to see? Please let me, which is funny the way he said this, what am I fixing to see? He said, please let me recognize it. And that's a whole nother thing I never thought about, is begging your mind, please recognize this. At least that way I'll have something to grasp onto, right? He said he's thinking about the worst. He pops the lights on and it's a raccoon with no tail. I don't know how he lost it, right? And we could speculate all day about how this raccoon lost its tail. But the idea of the way this thing was like, I guess it was trying to reach up and, of course, get something either to eat or fiddle with something, whatever it's doing. But him talking about it looking crouched over like a little, imagine that. I mean, like with a raccoon, you see it run, you see its big puffy tail, you recognize it much like a fox or anything else. But he's talking about being in the barns and seeing all this creepy stuff, got me to thinking about it. So where I grew up, we lived in a town called Granbury. We lived on a ranch. My parents were still together. And when my grandfather passed away, my father's father, we moved back to the home place, their home place. My grandmother moved into town, and we moved into their old home. And on this place was a big red barn, all right? And I don't have a lot of memories. We didn't live there but a few years. And I don't have a ton of like real hardcore memories to hang on to about the barn, but I have enough, right? Like I can, and to this day, they just tore it down a few years ago. To this day, you could drive by there and you could see there's another barn that sits exactly where our old barn used to be. And it was built by my grandfather and his two brothers. During the building of that barn, my grandfather's little brother scratched a mole on his body way back in the day, and it turned out, I guess it was melanoma, whatever it was, but it spread through his body, and it ended up taking his life. And the cancer just ravaged him, and he was a great big fella, much like my father. He was a very big man. And I never really thought anything about it till I went to putting all this thought stuff together, like, oh, is there anything going on? Because I never had anything happen. Y'all know I've never had anything crazy happen, like, he may have heard a voice or something here in my house. But I mean, like, really like an encounter. Never had that. But I never had any bad feelings about this barn either, right? It was just there. We would go and I would play in the barn and climb all up through the loft and all of this stuff. But there was a weirdness, I guess, now looking back at it, because my grandfather's brother, it took his life. It ended up causing the building of the barn or whatever, ended up causing his death. My grandfather passed away at the barn. So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff there at the barn. So I got to just stuck. And of course, there's barns everywhere, right? And most of the time they're huge, they're old. You go anywhere through the Midwest, you can see some beautiful barns. I mean, well, anywhere in any state, you go anywhere there's farming or ranching, you can see very beautiful barns. Those of you that watch Yellowstone, you see the big Yellowstone barn there. I mean, like, it's a very pretty place. So I started thinking about these barns and anything is there've got to be more encounters. There has to be more things. You'd be surprised, or heck, y'all may not be surprised at the number of things that are encountered in and around barns. Now, granted, most of these areas are very rural or close to rural areas, but some of them these days aren't. So it's odd that the barn itself could be the focus. Look, I don't know. I have no idea, but I'm going to start this off with this one here. It says, the creature I'm about to describe has never tried harming me, but it has oftentimes made me feel unsafe and threatened. As the years have passed, I've begun paying less mind to it and just putting the feeling in the back of my mind. January of 2012, I bought a horse and began boarding it at a very old barn near Pensacola, Florida. It was a small, tight-knit, friendly barn community not far from my home. It had been around since the 60s and was surrounded by woods. Now, there were 3 barns. The main area was entirely surrounded by thick woods, and there were small trails in the woods behind the property. Well, fast forward to June of 2012, I had 2 horses there now. And I was there every day, without fail, usually about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then I would stay till dark or even later, sometimes around 10. Now, I fed the horses and took care of them. And I rode one every night as well, mainly, of course, in the arena, but sometimes in the barnyard area. There were no field or arena lights, just the moon and the stars. If y'all have never done that, it really is a great time. So one evening around 5 p.m., I was sitting there on the horse, just letting her stand, and she kind of started snorting a little and backing up. So I looked up and I saw this grayish-white creature crawl out of the woods towards us. Now, it had a very small round head, and its eyes were just pits. It had a very small mouth, not much detail there, really. Its arms were very long and thin, and the fingers were like that also. Now, its rib cage was very pronounced and defined, and its legs, of course, they were long and lanky. Its movements, though, were very jerky. They were not smooth or fluid. And it slowly, in a jerking motion, moved out towards us. And when my horse turned and bolted out of the arena at this moment. Now, normally, she's a dead broke horse, right? Very well-mannered, extremely calm. Nothing ever spooks her. Just an old stubborn mare, but she's not a spooky horse. So, after this moment, she would not go back into that arena at night. From that moment forward, nothing. So, I walked her around the barnyard, staying near the main barn, put her up, and ran out to peek into the arena to find nothing except some footprints where I saw the thing. Now, throughout the summer, I saw it peeking, almost dancing around the gate that led into the woods where the trails were. Well, one night, roughly a month later, at about 9 p.m., I was riding that horse again in a front pasture. The moon was full and bright, and I looked to my left to see that creature running full speed right by my side, just on the other side of the fence. So I slowed my horse to a stop, and it took off around the corner and behind the side of one of the barns and back into the woods. Now, I continued seeing it mainly in the woods, but this thing was always around. Jump into the summer of 2013, and the owner of the barn, well, they had to shut it down because they passed. And we moved the horses to a friend's place for a time being, and I never saw it there. But late summer and early fall of 2013, I found a new barn with woods directly behind the barn and the arena. And this place had lights and, of course, was much newer. Well, sure enough, about a month later, when I was getting ready to leave, I heard something in the woods. I looked down the barn aisle into the woods, and I saw the creature running down the road into the tree line. I saw it much less frequently for a while, until later again in fall of 2014. That's when I began seeing it in the back pasture of the woods. It darted in and out of the tree line. I saw a second one setting in a neighbor's yard. It would set in the same spot every day and watch me ride. So I started taking pictures, which are very poor and crappy, and I sent them to a friend who claimed he or some others have seen this thing. Well, I kept seeing it occasionally, but from a much greater distance than at the first barn. I went with this barn owner to another farm to pick up some things when I saw a very, very large version of this creature run out of the woods, right behind a tree I was 10 feet from while I was alone by the trailer. And just a couple of Novembers ago, I house set for the barn owners, went out there around 2 a.m. to fill water troughs and enjoy the full moon and the cool night. I was sitting in the back pasture when 3 of these creatures began coming from the woods. One came up to the trees near the trough where I was. The other 2 were walking along the tree line. Now, the horses were silently munching their hay, pretty far from where the creatures were. I messaged the guy from earlier and told him what was going on, and since that incident, well, I haven't really seen them. Last summer, I did see one outside my house while I was staring out the window. And a few weeks ago, one was outside my bedroom window just tapping and making a strange, faint, shrieking noise. I hope someone reads this and helps me figure out this stuff some more. Anything would help. Thanks. So, y'all, I don't even know there's so many ways to go with this, right? First of all, this thing follows them, seems to be gathering numbers, right? First there was 1, then there was 2, then there was 3. More sounds like it's attached to this person. Or maybe this horse, I don't know, have no idea. Or maybe this person, maybe that's some shapeshifters in their family trying to induct them in the group. I don't know, but can you imagine just hanging out there, riding your horse, having a good time, seeing them? Look, KP's the one that sent this in, and look, you're handling it way better than I would, right? This seems like it's no big deal. To me, it's a very big deal. That stuff makes me uneasy. Here's another one. It says the 4 children were playing in a barn when they came across the unknown creature. Yeah, there you go, folks. It says 4 children were left hysterical after an unknown creature in an abandoned and haunted barn, well, it lunged towards them. Back in May of 1951, these children went to play in one of the oldest deserted barns that once stood on Roby's Car Lane. Now, dozens of locals recalled the rumors about a terrifying thing which would leave the dilapidated barn after dark and roam Roby and other parts of Hutton in the present-day borough of Knowsley, England, Merseyside. You know how y'all are with y'all spelling over there. But despite their parents' warnings of all these old structures, of course, crashing down on them, which would be a thing, right? Y'all know that's just one of the challenges you take as a kid. Everybody nosing around where you're not supposed to be. Something could fall on you. They said rough sleepers living in the former farm buildings and the hearing of strange stories about the place from other children, they still decided to explore this haunted barn. So it goes on to say that the creature was described as having dark brown, shiny skin, an insect-like shell on its back, 2 huge red eyes, and it stood just over 6 foot tall. So in May of 1951, a gang of 4 children, Tony, Jill, Alan, and George. Alan and George are the oldest. Both of them are 10 years old. We have a 7-year-old Jill and an 8-year-old Tony. Hey, Tony. So they went to play in this old barn, right? So this is what, like we talked about, you're not supposed to be over there. Don't be messing around. This is what they printed. It says George's parents had warned him about this, telling him that this place could be bad because there could be homeless people living there that might even try to attack you. We don't know what's going on. There could be something bad going down there. Well, of course, like everything else, he heard about this, decides to go. So takes all of them, right? So, and here's one of the other things that I've really found interesting. They brought up the word air raid shelter. So in this story, they talk about the air raid shelter. You can imagine kids being born, the boomers, right? Being born right after World War II, especially in England. If you're going around and you've heard all these stories from your parents, right, of the war, and now you were born right after the war, or maybe you were a real young child during the war and all this, exploration, you're going to want to go see it. You've heard about everything that took place. You're going to want to go out. So I can completely understand kids being extremely curious at this point. So this kind of makes sense. It's like, hey, look, y'all go play. That's great. So apparently these 4 kids did. They took off down in there. George led all of his family down in there. Here we went. They get down in the afternoon. It starts raining, of course, while it gets down there. They said that the sound of the rainfall on the tiles there scared off, or just scared, the youngest member, Jill, young girl there. Said George had a box of matches and he told everyone to find anything that would burn to make a fire. And this can be our new den, he said. And apparently he's like, I found a candle. So Alan gets this candle, shows up, little stubby candle, right? They get it all done. They get it lit. They make him a little fire out of just little pieces of wood. They find some leaves, some newspaper, build them a little campfire. They get it going. At this point, the kids notice, man, there's some weird like graffiti on the wall. There's a lot of drawings and sketchings and all this stuff. It looks like it's all been done with charcoal. And actually, they pointed out that it wasn't just like kids sketching. They're like, this looks really good. Like somebody spent some time down here. They didn't know, of course, like we talked about, that during this air raid shelter time that the people there had spent quite some time hiding in there. Of course, that's whenever they were drawing, and whoever was hiding there might very well have been an artist, right? So they're still checking all this stuff out, looking around this whole area. That's when they say that on the same wall where this charcoal drawing stuff was this creepy sketch, they say, of an unearthly creature with huge round eyes and pointed ears like a cat. They said it has long, spindly legs and arms and a massive mouth full of pointed teeth. Said this thing also had a tail reminiscent, the drawing folks, a tail reminiscent of a wasp's stinger. And next to what they said was in a life-size drawing, like it was big, were some very strange glyphs and symbols. It said, look, maybe like a coded message. And then in large block letters, it said, keep out. Well, of course, Jill, the baby girl, she didn't like it. I don't blame her. She sees all this stuff. She's like, I'm done. That's the boogeyman, of course, is what her brother tells her. Says that boogeyman right there eats little girls. And of course, they're all laughing. Well, not Jill. Jill's not ever laughing about this stuff. Right? Getting all this stuff going. So Alan, George's buddy there, George brought his kinfolk, and then Alan, his buddy, showed up, which is always the way the trouble starts. Alan starts giving her a hard time. All this stuff. They said during this point of the boys kind of picking at the little sister or whatnot, they hear something. They hear a very low moaning sound. Now, mind you, these are 10-year-old down to 7-year-olds. There's 4 of them. You're in a creepy, abandoned air raid shelter barn, and it's lightly raining, and now you start hearing a moaning sound, and it's coming from one of the rooms deep below, coming up out of a hole in the wall. Well, at first they started thinking, oh, it's a dog, right? That's what they say. It's a dog. Something was going on. No dog. So what they saw, or what they believe at this point now, was this thing. Right? It's this thing. So they get their fire, they got a little torch, they're looking off in this hole. And apparently this is what they see. Dark brown shiny skin and the insect-like shell on its back and 2 giant red eyes. They also say that it looked like it had belly buttons. All right, that's like belly buttons on it and large fanged mouth. And again, like they said, it was over 6 foot tall. It jumps at the kids, reaching for them with these long arms with what looked like a 3-finger claw, like talons, let's say, like on birds of prey, right? That's kind of what they described the end of its hands looking like. Story goes that they narrowly got away. This thing jumps at them. The kids freak out. They take off. They run down. They just run across Roby Road. They're just sprinting, right? They're getting the heck out of there. Well, the girl's mom, she's mad completely, right? Completely out of her mind mad. So bad so, turns out that Jill ended up wetting her pants because she was so scared. She couldn't even talk because she was so hysterical. The mom and all that stuff, they didn't believe anything about the monster. None of this stuff. They believed that it may have been something that involved, of course, like the homeless, or you know how all this stuff goes in there, but they weren't sure what was going on even at the pact of this stuff here. So, of course, they looked into it, this, that, and the other. They never really found anything. From what I can tell, the barn was torn down in the 60s, around this way. So maybe there was a giant insect being down in there. I can't imagine anybody just waiting around, right? Just to say, you know what, I think I'm going to try to play a trick on these kids, and I'm just going to hide down there, one of the parents, especially back then in the 50s. I mean, you talk about waiting around for a long time for a very, very minute chance of a payoff. That'd be terrible, right? How about this one? We're not going to take Michigan out of the equation. Don't forget about this. We got a little Sasquatch action up in Yale, Michigan. Cindy Baroni says it's not the torn down fences or the barn doors that have been ripped off the hinges, nor is it the high-pitched screaming that her family often hears at night. Says it's the unknown that scares us. If I knew what it was, I could deal with it. Now, what she's talking about is a very large, hairy creature that she and her family are convinced is a Bigfoot. And this creature, you know, exactly where it lives. Well, they have actually had an encounter with it. Listen to this. The Baroni's latest encounter with this monster, not really a monster, right? Come on, we don't know. Maybe he's just trying to pass out handshakes and high fives, was on a Friday evening in November. It says when daughters Tina and Roxanne went out to the barn to check on their animals. These girls are 12 and 13 years old. So Tina said the horses were acting very spooked, and when she reached for the light switch and, of course, the pitch black barn, get a little of this, y'all. She reaches in. Of course, we've all done this, right? You reach in the dark, whether you're trying to get anything. Oh, I don't want to feel anything. And she feels fur. Now, she said that this monster, this beast, was 2 foot above her, glaring down with bright red eyes. Now, Tina said that she didn't know what the animal was. I have no idea, she says. All I know is that its fur was about 1 inch thick, matted, and dirty. That's the encounter she had. Bigfoot hiding in her barn. Now, again, we've seen, and it's always with the movies, right? Always, you see Jeepers Creepers. Remember, they have him nailed to the barn, right? Like all this stuff's going on with the barn. Everything with this barn. I don't know. I like the idea, like we need to make a whole movie series where you just portal jump, right? In between barns. But what is it about creepy cryptids that like to slide and hide into barns? Now, listen to this one. This is near Todd Lake, Michigan. Said the witness was a teenager at the time and was, get ready, sneaking cigarettes, y'all, behind her parents' house up there, northeast of Reed City, Michigan, in the winter of 1993. Says the sun was setting on a clear, cold day. She was facing a large abandoned barn on the property next door. And through a hole broken in the siding, she saw what she thought was a piece of old farm machinery just sitting in the building. She watched it for a few moments. The object didn't move. Then a deer, some other large animal, snapped a branch in the woods nearby, and her attention was diverted. So she turned her head to see what had caused that noise. And in her peripheral vision, she noticed that the farm machinery moved also. When she looked back, the setting sun was silhouetting the object in the barn. She froze in place when she realized that she was looking at a tall animal. It turned its head back and looked straight at her. It was, in her words, at least 6 feet tall, if not more. It was dark colored. It had a dog-like appearance, pointy nose, and really big pointy ears. Well, she dashed into her house to grab a flashlight, and when she returned, she shone it towards the barn door, but the animal was no longer there. She walked closer to the barn to look for tracks in the heavy snow, and when she didn't see any, she realized the creature might still be inside, and she ran back to the safety of the house. Now she says that she's never seen the creature again, that she later talked to a friend who had seen something the size of a buffalo, but the shape of a dog in that same barn, but at a different time. And the girl had been hysterical for days after her encounter. And neither of these witnesses has heard of the legend, song, or about the Michigan dog man until years later. So, some young lady actually had maybe possibly the largest dog man ever living in her barn, slipping it. Now, look, if you're going to seek shelter, lots of animals are going to find shelter, right? Everything, you can build anything like that outside. Go out into the woods and just build you a little barn. It's only open on one side, let's say facing, not into the north, facing the south or whatever. Get it to where you could turn it some way where, yeah, anything will get in there, right? They're just looking like we do for any sort of safety. Maybe that's what this was at the time. I don't know. Here's one that I got from homie Lon. Lon's the best, right? I love that guy. This is one of the craziest encounters in an old barn in Alberta, Canada, with a Canadian spider bat. It says, hey, Lon, I've heard some good things about you. Well, yeah. We try to say them as much as we can. It says, recently, I think I may have encountered a cryptid of sorts that I've dubbed the giant Canadian spider bat because of its spider-like mouth and bat-like appearance, but also because it sounds cool. Bro, I'm with you. I'd like to tell you about the encounter now. It says this happened a week or so ago. Now, I don't know exactly what time it was, but it was dark. I live on a farm, and I was walking home after putting our farm animals to bed when I passed an old, practically fallen down barn on our property. It's in bad condition. It nearly collapsed on my mother once upon a time. And so I glanced at the barn as I neared it and witnessed a huge, bulky, maybe winged thing duck away into the barn incredibly fast. It seemed to me like it cowered away when I looked at it, and it didn't want to be caught watching me. Now, this thing was huge, seemingly too big to fit through the large open window at the front of the barn where it appeared to be perched. Its eyes were tiny, though, and glistened white. Now, once I saw the thing, I ran as fast as I could from my house. I felt a sensation that made me feel like something was rushing towards me incredibly fast, but never reaching me. That's the only way I can explain it. I still don't like going outside on my own when it's dark, and that old barn really freaks me out a little bit. And once in a while, I hear noises from seemingly within inside it. It sounds like somebody setting down a pile of wooden planks over and over. Now, it could be an echo from somewhere else on the property. I don't really know. But I also feel like it may have just been my mind playing tricks on me. But honestly, it seemed too unnaturally real. I feel like the barn is watching me whenever I pass it. Jay. Jay, that's another one of those. It's extremely unsettling, right? Like this, I don't know. This barn stories, I don't get them. It's got to be like we've discussed, where there's just all of these things with these animals and these creatures finding their ways into these barns and people are scaring them. I like this one here. He saw it one time. Says, hey, look, it may just be me. Maybe I'm the one losing my mind. I don't know. But either way, that is a few barn stories. I'm going to carry the rest of these over into the Elite Show. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll pick Mr. Fizzy's brain about more and get into some other crazy barn stories, probably on the outro. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. All right, there we go. More unsettling barn stories of it's just weird.
Yeah.
That the cryptid animals that we've covered, all of this, seem to be drawn. They've been seeing rakes around barns. They've been seeing Sasquatch in and around barns. The one lady saw a possible bison-sized dog man inside an old barn. But think about this, and like I had pointed out too, and we've discussed it, we have a friend, Kyle and I have a really close friend of ours, that saw something here in Parker County. We've discussed this before, walking along a fence line, going up and over a fence. They knew it was possible Sasquatch, or at least believed it to be later. And back in the area it was going was a bunch of old abandoned horse trailers and cars and things like that. Things that you could easily live in. Let's say if you were a raccoon, if you were anything and you wanted to get in out of the weather, the best place to make it, of course, is like in an old trunk, something like that, like you would see in a movie. So is it any different for the fact that maybe old abandoned dilapidated barns like we see owls live in and all this? Maybe the cryptids in that area, no, it's untouched and it's as good as you're going to get. You can slide right in there and stay. I mean, who knows? And it's been put in so many movies. It's been put in so many television series. Just the idea behind that is extremely unsettling. So it's fun. And like I said, folks, I'm going to do another one on the next Elite Show. I've got a ton more stuff to cover with some more barn sightings. But before we get on any more barn sightings, Kyle, Lon's grabbed me with another headline.
Okay.
I blame Lon for this. I messaged Lon and tell him he always gets me with the headlines. Thinks it's hilarious. And y'all know for a fact he does. Ute, Native Americans, because I'm going to sound like my cousin Vinny when I say this. Ute youth attacked by winged humanoid wolf near Skinwalker Ranch. Two Utes, but there was only one Ute, and they were youth. A Ute youth attacked by winged humanoid wolf.
Winged humanoid wolf. Do tell more.
Oh, yeah. Listen to this. It says, I've got a very unbelievable story to tell you. I don't know if you're familiar with the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, but I have a close relative that's pretty much the UFO guy in that area. And he's been telling me these stories ever since I was a little kid. I've been out to the ranch several times, and I was out there in the spring of 2013, and nothing happened. We went around the ranch areas, nothing happened. We went home, and on a Saturday night, well, something did happen, which I later found out through my UFO relative. There were some Ute native kids driving in a tall truck about 8 foot high. I'm assuming high racking. You know what I'm saying?
I know.
They say all that. High rack, folks, if you haven't seen it, if you don't really know what we're talking about down here in Texas, you'll see it in Mexico, Arizona. You'll see it in all kinds of spots like that where they put a rack built that either sets above the cab of the vehicle or in the bed of the vehicle, raised up really high where you can sit in chairs, usually swivel chairs, but it's all mounted and kind of surrounds you, and then you can shoot off the top. And you use it out there at night for spotlighting coyotes or pigs. You'll see it on YouTube when you see these high racks. That's kind of what I'm picturing when they talk about a tall truck, 8 foot tall.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine they're not driving in Bigfoot, right? They didn't lift it up just, grave digger, Sunday.
Ba John over there.
Ba John. Yeah, I don't picture that happening. So they said that they went through the gate of this UFO ranch, and they said that they saw an orb of light appearing in the window off or above the gate. And I guess they turned on their lights and said they turned on the engine because they got scared. So I guess they're just sitting there in the dark and this thing's moving around. They busted all off. Says then it got even brighter and went over the truck and the kids. And then something hit the truck. Says the kids got so scared that they went down the road to the main road and they got out, which is about 3/4 of a mile. Says they got out to look at the damage done to the truck, and for some reason the driver decided to be the passenger, and then the passenger was the driver. Apparently, there are some girls with them in the truck. And once they got back in the truck, this is where it gets very unbelievable. A creature grabbed this kid, who was the driver and now the passenger, pulled him out of the truck. It threw him around like a rag doll and bit him on the back several times and then clawed him.
Jeez.
Long story short, somehow this kid got back in the truck, and one of the kids took a picture of this creature. Says they didn't provide the image. And then of course, they're scared. They were able to get back in the truck, drive down the road and to the Ute Indian police station because of the Ute reservations over there. And that the native police there say that there's nothing that they can do about it because they are very aware of Skinwalker Ranch. So the next day, which would be a Sunday, they contacted this fellow's UFO relative, and he went down to investigate. It says, meanwhile, there was a shaman's wife, a shaman, and the shaman was there blessing the kids that were involved in this. Says
Good idea.
Yeah, for real. Says my UFO relative said that he saw the picture on his cell phone of this
What's
creature.
a UFO relative?
I'm assuming it's the relative that's into UFOs. Like they call you the podcast relative.
Okay.
Right?
I'm trying to follow the story. I'm like, wait a minute. His uncle's an extraterrestrial?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I'm curious if the kid that got attacked by this thing, now is he going to turn into a wolf?
I can't read down far enough, but I'm sure hoping so. I'm hoping that he's actually contracted lycanthropy.
Why did we go hunting on that Navajo reservation?
I don't know, because there's big mule deer around there. So if I'd have got turned into a werewolf, it'd have been just like, come on now, that we always, American Werewolf in London. Mm-hmm. One of us would have left the other one to get mauled like their buddy, and the other one would have became, I'd have been talking to you dead while I was turning into a werewolf, or vice versa.
Oh, yeah, I would have been Jack. I'd have been the guy running away, and I would not have turned around to come back to check on you. I'd be like, nope.
He can talk to me later.
Something got him. That's all I can say.
That's all it. He was, that's it. Well, it says the UFO relative. I can't even read the UFO relative now that you've said that. Jesus.
Sorry.
He says he also saw the damage that was done to the truck. It says there's a scratch into the truck, right? Mm-hmm. It says he also saw damage done to the kid, the bite marks, all of this stuff. Scratched into the truck was the word die.
Oh, well, that's not good.
Right? That's really helpful. It says, now this was very unbelievable for me to hear. But the crazy thing about it is a few months ago, I work at a hospital. One of my patients was actually the shaman's wife. She was the one that was also there at the time when my relative was there to investigate. So she told me exactly what my relative said, but in greater detail. The creature that she described, and also my relative, said it had to be a tall creature because it could hold this kid out of his window, drag him out. That's the 8-foot tall truck, and that this creature had horns. It had red hair. It had a human-like face, but the mouth was distorted, and it came out kind of like a wolf. It had claws, and it had wings. So my question is to you, and I've asked my UFO relative, is this a skinwalker? And he goes, no, this is actually something totally different.
Yeah, it's Lucifer.
And I asked also the shaman's wife, and she agreed that it was also something totally different.
You seen the movie The Prophecy?
Yeah, multiple times.
That's what's out there.
That's what's out there.
Oh, man.
There's some wolf thing that there's somebody got a picture of. Of course, the picture's probably awful because that's the way it always is, with the phone in the dark, and you're trying not to die with this wolf flying humanoid thing that's carving die in the side of your monster truck. That sounds terrible.
That does sound
terrible. But again, it's in and around that Skinwalker area, and there are endless stories of these sightings of actual, like these crazy cryptids that don't make sense.
Yeah,
not that any of them do, but like we always talk about, Bigfoot, things like that feel more physically believable than this thing.
I was just watching on YouTube a couple days ago. There's this guy I follow who goes around different parts of America and goes to these places like worn down ghettos, or he'll go to like Navajo nations. And he was on there, and he was on a reservation in Utah, I believe. And they were, this isn't a paranormal show. This is a regular like travel show. And they were all talking about the skinwalkers. So, like, it's universally known that that's a real thing.
It's just a weird area.
Very, very strange. Before we get out of here, don't forget, if you want to meet me and Cam, you can do that starting on September 2nd in Fort Worth, Texas. We're going to be at the 2nd annual Dogman Cryptid Conference. It's going to be cool. There's going to be lots of guest speakers there. There's going to be guys like Josh Turner, Christopher Garantano, Ken Gerhard, Lyle Blackburn, Nick Redfern, David Weatherly, Ron Moorhead, and a bunch of other speakers. It's going to be cool. But me and Cam are also going to be there. And if you come to this, you can talk to us. You can meet us. You can tell us your story. We're going to bring some audio equipment and some cameras, so we'll be able to do an interview with you. Or you just want to say hi and shake our hands and tell us your stories, you can do that too. I'll put links to it in the show notes. You can buy your tickets now. Don't wait. Again, that's September 2nd and September 3rd, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. It's going to be in Fort Worth, Texas, a little town called White Settlement, which is basically Fort Worth. And it's going to be really cool. If you don't want to go on our website or to the episode show notes, you can just go to Eventbrite, or you can Google search Paranormal Roundtable 2nd Annual Dogman Cryptid Conference. Come check it out. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've been to a lot of conferences over the years, and they're always fun to meet fans and talk to people. If you have some stories you'd like to send to us and share with the listeners like we did in the first segment, do not hesitate. You can call the show 888-393-BRUD. That's 888-393-2783. Or you can email the show expandedperspectives@yahoo.com. hellofresh.com, and we would love to hear your story. Let's not forget about our wonderful sponsor, HelloFresh.
Yeah, if y'all want to skip your trips to the grocery store and try America's #1 meal kit, go to hellofresh.com/expanded50 and use that code expanded50 for 50% off plus free shipping, y'all.
That's about all the time we have for this episode. Till next time, folks, be safe. We'll talk to you next week. I'm Kyle. He's Ken.
Peace, y'all.